Welcome to another episode of the Trees and Lines podcast. On this episode, we talk with Katie Fernholz, President and CEO of Dovetail Partners, Incorporated. Katie talks with us about better integration and land management across the industry, her work in wildfire risk mitigation, and with renewable energy. Have a listen. Hope you enjoy. So, Katie, I just thank you for joining us as a guest today. Excited to have you. Katie and I've worked together for over a decade, she just told me. So I know you, Katie, but why don't you introduce yourself to our audience and tell us a little bit about Dovetail Partners?
Excellent. Thank you, Phil. Happy to be here and to be part of this conversation. I'm a forester by training. I've worked in forestry, broadly speaking, for about 27 years, which also means I've worked in all dimensions of sustainability throughout that time, because forests, trees, forest products, the land where trees grow, it's also deeply connected. The places where people live, where trees grow, these are all deeply connected to sustainability. So worked in forestry, sustainability throughout my career, and most of my career has been within nonprofit space. And my current day job is as President CEO of Dovetail Partners. Most people refer to Dovetail as an environmental think tank, and that's what we do. We ask ourselves big questions and try and help people find big, enlightening answers.
And I'll just say you intersect with the right-of-way industry or the utility industry through the Right-of-Way Stewardship Council. Can you tell us a little bit or bring us up to date on right-of-way steward?
Yes, the Right-of-Way Stewardship Council. Dovetail Partners has the great privilege and honor to be the administrative home for the Right-of-Way Stewardship Council. So the council members, which represent the sector, they have the decision-making authority. They set the strategic direction for the Right-of-Way Stewardship Council, and Dovetail is just, the incubator, the administrator, the home base as a nonprofit administrator of all of that work. And so, we've been doing that for more than a decade. When the idea of the Right-of-Way Stewardship Council was started, Dovetail already had a long history of working with standard setting, environmental auditing practices, some of those basic core strengths for the council. And so it was a natural fit between the vision for the council and what Dovetail felt they could create space for.
How big is your team, Katie?
That's always supposed to be an easy question, but Dovetail is not structured like a lot of really hierarchical kind of organizations, and so between our staff and associates and all of the support for our organization, we're about 20 people, but we have 5 full-time employees. We have at least six formal associates. We have several additional contractors that are integral to our projects. So it's a neat team, and we've always been structured that way. Dovetail, like I said, most people think of us as an environmental think tank. A lot of people also think of Dovetail as an environmental consultancy because I'm from the Midwest, where there's such a thing called polka, and this really, my mother plays it, so I should be more kind. But this thing called an accordion, I don't know if you know, accordion and bagpipe are kind of in this category of instruments that anyway, Dovetail's kind of like an accordion. We get bigger when, we adjust our size and we meet people where they are. And anyway, how's that? So we're either a think tank, an environmental consultancy, or an accordion, whichever one.
That's how you've stated that, how others think of you. Mm-hmm. How would you describe what you guys are really focused on and how you do it?
We're focused on people.
Okay.
We're a people-centered organization. And our way of tackling challenges is to find people and give them permission to follow their hearts and minds with whatever their passion is. So Dovetail, we work on environmental stuff, but we do it with people that care and that are going to contribute their energy and their thoughtfulness to it. So we're a space for people to thrive in.
Okay. Good. As the CEO, Katie, there's obviously you've got to put in some structure and organization into the what you're going to focus on in any given year. So, for example, in 2024, what are some of the major topics you guys are focused on tackling? What's on the radar?
That's a very good question. The biggest one at the top of the list, surprisingly or not surprisingly, is international trade policy.
Okay.
And so the EU last summer finalized their EU deforestation regulation. And so by January of 25, major commodities are going to have to meet that regulation if they're going to import to Europe. And wood, basically all forest products are on that list. And so there's a whole bunch of regulations there in terms of transparency and due diligence within the supply chain and risk assessment. So that's top of the list is trade policy and really nation-to-nation interactions around economic and environmental impacts.
Oh, that's interesting, Katie. So there really are no limits to what you guys will focus on, right?
Right.
But it'll all stay within the environmental and sustainable space.
Yes, we focus on the sustainability space, which basically everything's in that space. So the other key factor for what we take on is, do we have the expertise to take that on? Is that within our wheelhouse? Can we do that in a quality way? And if the answer is our current team doesn't have the knowledge or expertise, then the question, who are we going to partner with to get there?
Right.
So yeah, we'll take on the whole spectrum of cultural, environmental, economic, sustainability questions, that whole spectrum. But then the key secondary factor is making sure we're bringing really quality expertise, experience, insight to those things.
Let's say a private sector organization is interested in something or looking for some additional research. Like, do you partner with the sectors as well to focus on stuff, or is this all originated by what you guys want to focus on?
Oh, it's a healthy combination. So Dovetail partners with all kinds of public organizations, whether they're local, state, federal, international. So we work with public organizations, private entities, and we do have plenty of projects that within our team we self-initiate. As a nonprofit, all of our work has to be aligned with our mission, and our mission is to provide high-quality environmental information that influences, impacts, environmental decision making, guides environmental decision making, and as a nonprofit, not only does all of our work have to be in alignment with our mission, we also always have to speak to public benefit from the work that we're doing as a nonprofit. And so that means we very rarely will do anything that's proprietary. The work that we do becomes public information. It's at our website. It's accessible so that, there's public benefit from that work.
You've done a lot with forest certification.
Yep.
Is that correct? So
Yes.
that was the natural tie to the right-of-way steward, if I recall.
Yes.
So you spend a fair amount of time out in the forest, I assume.
More in the past than I have recently.
Okay.
But yes, there were many years as a forest certification auditor on the team, and yes, walking through lots of forests and harvest sites and inspecting timber management and all aspects of forest management within those certification programs. So now I do a lot more peer reviewing of certification audits rather than having to go out in the field every time. But yeah, Dovetail, that's some of the early work we got started on. Dovetail's 20 years old. So 20 years ago, forest certification was an area of a lot of question and concern and trying to sort through strategic pathways. So Dovetail's done a lot of work around certification standards, auditing practices, interactions between the different programs, supply chain accountability, chain of custody, you name it.
So I sort of was headed down this route because we've had guests and we've talked to a lot of veg managers for utilities out there trying to get a handle on how are they seeing in this case, utility force change over the last decade or so. And I'm not sure I'm getting a clear picture. So what have you seen? What are the tangible changes you're seeing in the forest that you're working with?
Yeah, so there are, in my opinion, a lot of them, and maybe that's just because I've been doing this long enough. Because the forest doesn't change that quickly on its own, but you stick around long enough and you can see it. And so when I look at how natural resource management, whether it's forest management, right-of-way management, wildlife habitat management, when we look at how natural resource management has changed really over at least the last generation, or even the last 2 or 3 generations, things we talked about in the past as wouldn't it be nice if we could, we're doing them now. That's what I see happening. So, and I think that is the way to think about the change, is in every generation we imagine wouldn't it be nice if we could, and we need to say those things out loud and figure out how to do them. Because what we've figured out in natural resource management is incredible levels of monitoring, data collection, data analysis, remote sensing as ways to monitor areas and to adjust our practices. It's that saying around Silicon Valley of fail fast. In natural resource management, what you have to do is pilot do lots of different pilots, because you don't actually necessarily get feedback on things very quickly. It takes a while for the impacts, but you got to try lots of different things and then be able to see which things are working. And so we've seen lots of innovation around treatment design, the return interval, the intensity of treatments. One of the things I think many people working with natural resources recognize is happening in this moment is really figuring out cultural management practices and the use of things like prescribed fire and even grazing. North America's ecosystems have a long history of interactions with people, fire, and herds of animals. And those are management systems that I think modern land managers are trying to figure out historically, how did that work and what does that mean today? But I see those kinds of evolutions. But the take-home message is the things we thought about doing in the past, we're doing. And that's really the message going forward is it doesn't matter if we're not doing it yet. If we can start to imagine it and we can start to see the value of it and we can talk with other people, because that's what I also see is better integration across land management interests than ever before. Whether it's wildlife biologists working with foresters or right-of-way managers working with timber management organizations, we're finally speaking the same language, partly because we're sharing data and information in new ways and collaborating around data collection. But yeah, I don't know. Could you tell there? I'm excited about it. I think we're doing good work and there's more to come. So,
how much of the utility community is part of your interest, work, project percentage? Like, how much of the utilities do you focus on and their footprints?
Yeah, the Right-of-Way Stewardship Council, there's 9 accredited utilities right now, and the program is really focused on transmission, so not distribution. So that narrows it down into that kind of arena. More broadly, Dovetail does a lot of work looking at renewable energy. We just did our most recent report this month on bioenergy outlooks, including So there's intersections there around other parts of our work and certainly some of our policy work that looks at energy. So there's the intersections. I mean, as a percentage, I wouldn't hazard a guess there. Don't hold me to percentages. Yeah.
So carbon sequestration is obviously a big topic. Have you guys done any studies on the valuation of footprints and regions and say, okay, hey, before we make a decision on the optimization of, the clearing of this particular area, we believe that its carbon value is X. And, because of that, we should implement strategy A or B. That's our recommendation. Like, have you quantified things from a dollar per ton perspective?
So there's a couple different answers. And I'll tell you, the mistake or the challenge I always have is sometimes when I hear yes, no questions, I feel like I have to say yes, no. So, but on that one, I actually can't say yes, no. So that's why I'm hedging.
Yes, I got you.
Exactly. It's the auditor in me, You get yes, no questions. And so, yes, Dovetail's done a lot of work with carbon and with natural climate solutions, land-based carbon, forest-based carbon, as well as soil carbon. We've done a lot of work in that space. We have worked on the valuation side of that. And so there's a couple things I would say. We're in the midst of finalizing a project. We started almost a year ago looking at the trade-offs and complications around forest carbon offsets. And that project gets right at this question of how are we valuing all the different products and services from a forest, recognizing that climate mitigation, carbon's just one of them, but our forests do all kinds of things. And if we're going to start putting values on some of those things and how does that all play out? So at the beginning of the year, we did a concept paper for that project that framed it all out, kind of just the complexity of that situation and really finding the resiliency within that complexity. And in June, we had a workshop around that project. And so later this fall, the final report will be coming out. But what you're asking is exactly the kind of questions we were asking in that project, is how does this triangulate? We're asking these lands to do many different things at one time. The other part of that where Dovetail has explored is just the whole concept of valuation. And so one of the challenges if we just talk about carbon offset markets, one of the challenges is the prices in the carbon market are largely set by the customers. It's a willingness to pay price, where the customer is saying, I will pay this much for an offset, because that's in comparison to what it would take for me to reduce my emissions. So it's the customer, the buyer, that is valuing those offsets. Right. What's missing in that is the producer of the offset having a say. How much would it cost for me to produce that offset for you? And so there's different forest management practices that have different costs for storing carbon. Planting trees has a certain cost. Reducing wildfire risk by doing thinnings and fuel treatments has a certain cost. So that's the other thing that Dovetail's looked at very closely, is how do we bring that together? So the buyer's level of investment that they're willing to make somehow aligns with the cost to produce those offsets. And we're starting to see that thinking. It was controversial, but maybe it's almost 2 months ago, at least 6 weeks ago now, when the Science-Based Targets Initiative, when they came out with a position supporting offsets and a couple of different ways to do it. And one of the things that is proposed in there is really just an investment structure where it's an amount of money that's going to be put forward, and then producers of offsets can demonstrate what they can do within that amount of investment. So I like to see that kind of innovative thinking. I think that'll help the market function better than it has. So I don't know if that's the direction you wanted to go with that question, but that's where my mind goes.
Yeah, no. I think there's a bigger conversation around this, like, that could build off of your papers and your study, yes, which is really like how utilities
yes,
look at the right-of-way as more of the asset,
yep,
right? Which I know the Right-of-Way Stewardship Council focuses on asset versus liability, but I think in terms of like how budgets are set, yes, and decisions are made and time cycles versus condition-based cycles, like, I think you've got, and again, this is just my perspective, yeah, very narrow, but like, I think there is progress being made to say, okay, hey, we're part of the council, we're going to do it this way, but I don't think the dots have all been connected, right, where all the stakeholders are looking at it and saying, okay, the asset is actually valued at X, right? Established by however you want to, supply demand metrics you want us, in the carbon market, but like, and based on that value, there's either a preservation of that value or there's decisions made based on that value. So I'm kind of curious where you think we are in the life cycle of that, and that's just always something that I think is a topic that I think is going to help drive future decisions in this space. I just don't think we're there yet, and exactly, I'm kind of curious where you guys are with that.
The challenge with me is you ask me a question, you ask my opinion, you might get it. And so, and I tend to be blunt. And so,
no, that's good.
To me, we're only at the tip of the iceberg there. So I've been in some conversations where people think these markets, even like carbon offset markets, are maturing. And I say, dear God, I hope not. Because we need way more disruption and innovation than what we've seen to date in the marketplace. And part of the reason I say that is right now, so many of these initiatives, they're voluntary. And so to me, when the cycle is still in a voluntary phase, if you're not innovating and disrupting, then we're not moving forward. Because if the voluntary phase of this development can't be incredibly influential, then we're never going to get to a phase where we're setting some standards of practice. So that's the way I see it, is we've only scratched the surface of the type of innovation that's needed. And there's two levels that I think are really important in this moment. One is the individual company, and within their decision-making body, saying, what are we able to do? Just forget about the universe. In what we can control, how bold can we be? And some organizations can't be very bold for a whole bunch of reasons. But for organizations that are like, we can push the limits, to me, there's no limit. Go crazy. Just go as far as you possibly can within the knowledge you have, the resources, the capacity you have to innovate and chart a new course. It's one of those moments where if you can imagine it, plan it, design it, do it. And so I think individual companies, thought leaders, decision makers have an incredible role to play. We're seeing some of that right now, of course, within the tech sector. We need to see way more sectors doing what we've seen some of the tech sector get a lot of credit for. The other part of that is innovation at the state level. I'm really bullish on the role of state policy and state innovation. One of the things, it's flippant perhaps, But the largest carbon market we have is basically a state program, California. Yes, I understand they have regional partnerships, but essentially that's what we have to remember, is the big driver, the one that everyone's paying attention to, is essentially based upon state policy. And I don't see any reason other states couldn't sit down at a table and say, how do we make this opportunity work within our borders or within our context for our jurisdiction? So I think there's a lot of room, but like I said, the main thing is I watch those carbon markets or ecosystem markets or those kinds of natural climate solution conversations. I'm always watching for big innovation, not just more of the same, because we need more. We need more innovation and frankly, like I said, disruption. We need disruptive innovation.
How do you guys secure your funding?
Yeah. With all of these opinions, are you saying I alienate people, and why would anyone fund?
No. I'm wondering, like,
why would anyone fund this lady?
You guys have a lot of initiatives, and
yes,
it seems like a lot of things you guys want to do. I'm just wondering how you guys fund yourself.
Yeah, and we just published our 2023 annual report. That's at our website. All of our annual reports are there and list a lot of our supporters. Dovetail's overall funding, we are a nonprofit, 501c3, and so our funding mechanisms run the whole spectrum. There's individual donations, very few corporate donations. We don't have, very little. It's where we see corporate sponsorship is not one of our major funding sources. The Right-of-Way Stewardship Council over the years has had some corporate sponsorship. That's also in the Right-of-Way Stewardship Council reporting and information. And so the bulk of our work is grant and contract based with public and private organizations. We work a lot with federal government funding, state level funding, organizations that support natural resource sustainability. At our website, the reports that are in our report portfolio library, they always identify the funding kind of partners that are involved with our reports if it's coming from a project. And on our news page, when we announce our different projects, it always talks about the public and private sources of funding for that. So it's pretty diversified. I've worked in the nonprofit space most of my career, and it's probably one of my favorite things with Dovetail that we do have this ability to work with many different partners. And most of our projects, people come to us. We don't do a whole lot of, just kind of. There's a lot of, the vast majority of our projects, people come to us and really want to collaborate around something. So there's a whole kind of idea generation part of what happens within our work too.
I was on your website last week or shortly before that. It is absolutely amazing how many different areas you folks touch.
Thank you. Yeah.
It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. It is, and we do, because part of it is what we talk about a lot is everything's connected. Like I said, if something has a connection to sustainability, and within our team we have expertise around it, we lean into it. That's kind of the way we go after things. And our logic is also, if we're thinking about it, I bet other people are. Really trying to. One of the ways that some of our partners like to describe Dovetail is, or the strength of Dovetail is that we strive and sometimes we succeed, but in looking around corners, trying to look down the path. Where is this going? But where might there be, a hard right or a hard left, or where's the corner in this issue? What we might not be seeing, and so we do. We try and look out ahead, and we try and look around corners, and we also. It's a strange philosophy potentially within Dovetail, but when we get to a point where something we've been working on, everybody else starts working on, we give it up. And we try to move on to the next thing and move into a different space, because as a nonprofit, we want to be clearing the way for innovation. And if something becomes, if there's something that like the for-profit sector can do, then we're going to let them do that. And we're going to go move into some of the other issues that maybe we want to open up space around and create economic opportunity or investment opportunity around. So we do some of that stuff too, where we stop doing the things we've had great success on and try to move to the next thing. So I don't know. That's why we're a nonprofit.
That's the idea of being a think tank, right?
Exactly.
If everybody else is doing it, then you're not creating new.
Exactly.
Are you guys doing any work around wildfire risk mitigation? Obviously, a big topic in the U.S. And what capacity are you guys focused there?
Yeah, so wildfire risk mitigation is a big area of work, and we got involved over 13, almost 15 years ago. in large part because at that time we saw the significance of the issue and how it was emerging, and an opportunity developed that we could take part in. But it was something that was on our radar screen. Well, we said this is a critical issue for communities, for the environment, for climate change risk, wildfire being an absolutely critical issue. And so we had our radar up to figure out where we could be involved with that. And so at that time, the Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network was formed, and the organizations forming that had great leadership in making sure that the FACT network would be a nationwide network and make sure that the issue of wildfire didn't become something that people thought is only a Western issue. And at the time, Dovetail fundamentally believed that's exactly it. This is a national issue. There's risk for wildfire everywhere, and also where wildfire becomes so impactful, it creates instability between your choices as a nation and what you can do. So whether it's in your backyard that you're having a wildfire, or just resources are being diverted in such a way. So anyway, so Dovetail's been working on wildfire risk resiliency and mitigation for almost 15 years. And it's it's a pretty unique project within our team because it's on the ground. We work in northern Minnesota with communities, doing forest treatments, reducing wildfire risk directly on the ground through changes in land management and through community engagement. And part of what we're doing with that work is not just addressing wildfire risk mitigation, but is engaging the social and cultural dimensions of how that becomes possible. Because wildfire risk mitigation is behavior change within communities, not just on your own property, but how you communicate with neighbors, how emergency management and fire departments function within a community. There's a whole bunch of cultural behavior commitments that are made, relationships that are formed to be wildfire resilient. And that social, cultural aspect of sustainability is key to what Dovetail really wants people to have a clear mental model for. And it's also with wildfire risk mitigation, it's not one and you're done. You really have to care for and nurture the land for it to maintain its resiliency. And you have to be, ready for that long-term commitment. So there's a whole bunch of cultural, social dimensions to that work. And the work with national partners and seeing how that's being done in communities all around the country, the thought leadership, and the emotional support it creates within the community, it's really fun to be a part of.
You said you've been in the nonprofit space
Yep.
for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
You have the flexibility to work on a variety of projects.
Yeah.
Like, ever been enticed by going to the private sector and trying to have an impact? With a private company?
It's another one of those yes/no questions. I just got to say no. That's the easy answer. But
okay.
I'm teasing. What I'm saying with that is, early in my career, I was in the private sector with an engineering surveying firm in their environmental department, and that was a very good time in terms of learning, permitting processes and some of those basic kind of environmental considerations. I think the thing I really value and that I would miss if I went to work for any other kind of public or private organization is the freedom to just look across the entire landscape. And it's hard to replicate the freedom that Dovetail creates for just looking, across sectors, across the whole economy, across, supply chains, products. I think there are spaces in companies where some of that kind of broad thinking can exist, but the scale at which Dovetail is able to do it is very compelling. I will tell you, I had a conversation. The one other career path that has actually crossed my mind in the last year that maybe if I would have made some other choices as a teenager would be diplomacy and being within the State Department. I mean, I really think we're living at a time where we have to move from private sector leadership and national policies to really leaning back into international relationships. And so it's always appealed to me the role of diplomacy and nation-to-nation relationships. But I see that as something more and more urgent. Just where is our skill set to really come to the table and put the time into it, that, what it really takes to have those types of relationships. And when I was in high school, I was an exchange student, but I went to the Netherlands and I learned Dutch. And so if I had just gone somewhere and learned French, maybe I would have, gone on a whole different. But all I mean with that is I do think, I think what appeals to me in this work, and part of the space that Dovetail's created, is being able to think at a high level across connections. And maybe if an organization offered that, I'd think about it again. But I don't know.
How do you anticipate that your work and your engagement with the market will be impacted based on the upcoming election? Does it matter?
Oh yes. Oh yeah. Yeah. I'm just going to focus in on forest products and forest management policy. And what we see is each administration in DC, or when the dominant party changes in DC, it tends to whipsaw environmental policy in general, natural resource policy, national forest management policy, some of the things around manufacturing, forest products industry, because each party tends to kind of want to make an impact there. And so in general, whenever there's a large national election, the forest sector has to get ready for some kind of change. And you can sit there and you can talk about whether it's good or bad change, but the challenge is when you're talking about resources like forests, they don't change as quickly as our politics. And it's really hard to adjust, your forest management strategy every 4 years. And so that's the biggest thing. I think one of the conversations I've had recently with partners in the forest and forest product sector, forest and wood product sectors, is really leaning into our relationships with federal government, which I don't encourage you to start a conversation like that. Most people be like, whoa, 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 we don't want, right. But what I mean when I say that is it's a relationship. I'm not talking about more regulation. I'm talking about a relationship where more agencies and more departments understand the impacts, understand the decisions that are being made on the landscape, and understand how essential stable policy is for maintaining investments and effective management of these resources. I mean, the forest sector over the last couple generations has embraced and adjusted to some pretty substantial environmental policies, Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, Endangered Species Act, these kinds of things. And the sector's doing that at a very high level. What causes challenges in the sector is when somebody wants to open it up and start rewriting. So because those things they're common practice within the sector. And so, and with so many natural resource management issues, it's really important that you keep doing things for a while so you can see what we're learning. But if you have to change it every few years, you just don't learn as much. You don't figure out as much. You don't get good at what you're doing. You're just constantly having to rewrite the manuals. So everybody, I think, expects within the forest sector, every time we have a big national election, things are going to change. Exactly what that change is going to look like. I've been around this sector long enough that many of the predictions have been wrong. Past presidents that people expected to be environmentally friendly didn't necessarily play out that way. I mean, I think many of us know our American history correct me, isn't it Nixon who signed a whole bunch of the environmental laws, right? So, the direct alignment between party positions and environmental policy isn't always as straightforward. But yeah, I think we know change is probably coming, and that's the biggest thing. We have to have a better relationship with federal agencies so that we have greater stability, because it's disruptive.
Yeah. You run Dovetail out of Minnesota, is that right? Okay. Mm-hmm. And is that for a particular reason? Is that just because you're there? You
live there?
Yes. It's because, I don't know if you know this, but the winters here are spectacular.
I'm Canadian.
Have you heard
so
that? Yes. Well, so not that good, but pretty close. Yeah, the Minnesota winters. That's why we're here.
I love Minnesota.
Yeah.
Phil's taken me to Minnesota a couple times. It's lovely. I think it's
Minnesota winters, and I'm here. Those don't belong in the
I
same
know.
sentence.
No, they don't. No, I mean, Dovetail's in Minnesota. Our founder, Jeff Howe, at the time he founded Dovetail, was in Minnesota. He recruited me. I was in Minnesota. But up until, a year ago this time, I was the only person on the team in the Twin Cities. And so that's changed in the last year. But Dovetail is based in Minnesota. Our office in Minneapolis is where I'm sitting. But our team is distributed across the country and even outside of the U.S. So it's,
Well,
so how broad is yours? You said outside the states?
Yeah. We have a colleague on our team who's in France, just outside Geneva, and so he does a lot of our work on EU policy, trade policy from that perspective, and the rest of our colleagues right now, I think, are U.S. based. Yeah, that's changed over the years.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I have lots of projects that I could work with you on. Lots of ideas that I have. So,
was there anything, Katie, specific that Dovetail's doing that you'd like to talk about that we didn't get to, or Right Away Steward for that matter?
Oh, I just say go to the website, and we have one of those websites that if you click on the home page, it'll ask you for your email, and there's a trick. There's a trick with if you sign up for our newsletter. And it's kind of two tricks. One is it's one email once a month. That's it. One email once a month. The big trick with our newsletter is if you hit reply, it comes right to me. So if you sign up for our newsletter, you have an open channel of communication, a reminder each month to hit reply and tell me what you're thinking. So
I'm gonna do that today.
Good. Wonderful.
We'll remember that.
One thing I appreciate, that Katie and team are doing is that they can, when you are not tied to any one particular entity, you have the flexibility of, again, working on, an array of things. And, I'm newer to the space in terms of forestation and the utility services side of this discussion. Probably in the last 5 to 7 years, but I'm fascinated in where it's going. I think I'm interested to see how the money intersects with the policy.
Yes.
Because there's always a debate and a discussion about like funding, right? Like budgets and how much of that environmental focus is getting incorporated into the budgets, because ultimately those dollars per megawatt hour or kilowatt hour, somebody has to pay for that, and that the sensitivity of inflation, high energy prices, how much is too much, and that whole conversation interests me greatly. So thank you so much for today. I would love to continue this dialogue. And maybe in a future episode, take one of your projects and really kind of focus on something that you're tackling. But this was a great, way to get to know you and all the great stuff that you guys you're working on. So I really appreciate you making the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Tesh. I appreciate being able to be here and would love the opportunity to continue the conversation. I will say, being a forester has been wonderful. Being a diplomat would have been cool. But I've also thought, man, if I could have just been an economist, that would have been cool too.
I feel like you get to do a little bit of everything in your role.
Like a range of things here.
Exactly. But thank you.
That's it for this episode of Trees and Lines, brought to you by Iapetus Holdings. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify. If you have any questions or comments on any of our episodes or ideas for topics or guests, we'd love to hear from you. Please contact us at treesandlines@iapetusllc.com. We'll chat with you soon.